All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Gestalt Education Show. So we are here at National University in Lombard, Illinois, just outside Chicago, with the man that needs no introduction, Terry Elder. So, Terry, you've been teaching for a long time. We'll put it that way.
1988, starting with Mopal.
Yeah.
And 1993 at National.
Wow. That's amazing. Brett, when was the first time that you saw Terry?
I was trimester 2 at Logan, and, just kind of like a little bit confused on how this whole manipulation thing was working. And so I went to University of Missouri, and my buddies were in Kansas City, so they're like, why don't you come to Kansas City for the weekend? And so I randomly go to this MPI seminar, and to be honest, I didn't even want to go. I was just going because my friends were there and et cetera. So we stumble in there, and it was the one and only Terry Elder. And for 3 hours in that opening MPI lecture, I was just captivated because everything made sense. I don't even know that, if I hadn't gone to that seminar, I don't even know that I would be a chiropractor right now. But Terry just pieced it all together so perfectly. Manipulation made so much sense to me. Even as dumb as I was at that point, I knew that I wasn't repositioning bones, but I just hadn't had anyone explain it to me exactly how this all works. And so when I saw Terry, it literally changed my life. And anyone who will listen they'll tell you, MPI, that seminar got me involved in MPI. MPI got me involved in everything that I'm doing now. So without that, it's just
funny. All of us here, we're sitting with some MPI reps now. It's funny to see the lineage of MPI, and that's part of this podcast. Half the people here, we're interviewing people because of MPI. So it's cool.
Yeah. So I don't even know what to say. Without Terry Elder, there's no telling what I'm doing. I'm probably using my business degree doing something else. So,
he's in a ditch, let's be honest.
I'm in a gutter.
And ironically, my proudest moment is who I teach. Because if you think of some of the best in the world, I've taught them, right? Including, although he might not be doing what I taught him, Tom Lotus, he was Mr. Adjusting on campus.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Got to teach Mark, got to teach Brett, got to teach Corey, got to teach Sarah, everybody.
We told
They're all awesome.
Yeah.
So
we told a hilarious story last night. So you had me do an opening lecture in St. Louis when I was still a student.
Oh, yeah.
But you brought Tom down. I'd never met Tom. Tom and I become fast friends immediately when we meet, and so we stay up all night, and we woke up on these lawn chairs outside the hotel on that Sunday morning, typical MPI seminar, and that was Tom and I's meeting, and we're still to this day we're really good friends. So.
Well, Terry, let's maybe talk us through the continuum with you with MPI, and where did motion palpation play into your career, and kind of how did that set you up to where you're at now?
So, a good MPI, it's all good, but good parts and bad parts got me here. But because I am here, I actually love it. But I started Tri3. Paul Hooper. Way back in the day was one of the motion palpation instructors, and he asked me to go to one of Bruce Weary's seminars, and I pretty much had the same experience Brett did. I was, a really good student, wanted this all to make sense, and I happened to go to school at a very dogmatic not very scientific school.
You got to pull your punches.
And so, it was earth-shattering. Paul asked me to start a motion palpation club at the school I was at, and I ran the motion palpation club for a couple years. Went to every seminar that was in St. Louis and Kansas City and anything I could get to. Had some fun times like Brett did with Tom, those kind of things, and started, practice thereafter, and went through a divorce about the same time that I taught a seminar for the Illinois Chiropractic Association. And the chair of the chiropractic department at National was one of my demonstrating models, so to speak. And I did a particular CT adjustment on him that changed his life, I might say. And
subtle brag.
And he at that time had been asked by the president at the time to start motion palpation at National. But he couldn't do it by himself. So he brought me in, and between Dr. Soltis and I, and if you guys don't know Dr. Soltis, he now runs McKinsey
NDT USA, yeah.
for North America. So we put together the program. Back then it was all adjusting as a class, palpation is a different class, orthopedics is a different class, and we brought it together and thought, well, you should maybe palpate with your adjusting, and maybe you should see if it's okay to palpate them so they don't die when you palpate them. And so we literally created the motion palpation program at National. And it's been pretty much that way. We've had a few shifts back and forth because I've been here since '93, but the adjusting stuff has stayed pretty much the same.
Why do you think, Terry, as a profession, we have such a hard time grabbing onto this dynamic model? Like, still, I mean, it's so hard for me to imagine that at this point we still have people that are still preaching a static model, and I mean, I just can't even wrap my brain around it. But why is that? Why do you think it's so hard for people to grab on what we teach at MPI?
So it's ironic because I started with the Fay paradigm shift model, and it only made sense that if you bring in the science and you have some understanding, that everybody would get it and they would want to start practicing that way. And they don't. It's like they totally, and as an evidence of that, in the very beginning, Dr. Fay would have 100 people at his seminars, and within 2 hours, 50 people would leave because they were so upset because it was not their dogmatic philosophy that they're used to. And to me, that's a great disappointment. It's like we have the best profession in the world, and I know that I could refer people to you and everybody in this room, and I would never have any worries. But then why do we have to work so hard to figure out a referral?
Right.
Because you have no idea what's going to happen. You don't know if it's going to be a ring dinger or if it's going to be, some other nebulous technique,
I think too, like on our journey here, most people go through, and I'll just speak for myself, the adjusting was always easy for me, came naturally, but then I almost had to take a step back and learn how to palpate. And I think that's the thing that I'm continuing working on at this point in my life, is to be better and better at joint play. And the epiphany moment I had while teaching was I realized my students were struggling with feeling things with joint play. And I realized, I was watching someone palpate, and I realized none of them were taking the joint to in range before they sprung it. And I was, but I wasn't teaching that. Yeah. And that is the key to being able to feel joint play. Once I realized that, I drove home from Logan that day, just oh my God, that is the missing link that people need to know about palpation. But the other interesting thing about being a great adjuster is you have the psychomotor skill of being a good adjuster, but you also have to be a good palpator. Yeah. And they go together, but they're two different skills. And I always liken it to professional baseball. It's hard to be a pitcher and a great hitter, because
Yes.
they're two like crazy
Separate
skills,
things,
right?
yeah.
So how do you teach your students to be better palpators? Let's just not talk about adjusting. Let's talk about, because really, if you can't palpate, it doesn't matter. It's like having all the money in the world and you don't have an ATM card to get to it,
Well, unfortunately, in this scenario of the classes I teach, I spend a lot of time on palpation in trimester 3, which is pelvis and lumbars. Less so in tri 6 because they've had all the palpation. But I totally agree with you. Here's the problem with not being able to palpate. The adjustments are so powerful that you can blow through a joint that doesn't need it, and you're doing it on the wrong joint, and it still cavitates. And of course, we get all excited because it cavitates, and it might not necessarily help the person.
Right.
So I would say I'm guilty of not spending enough time with palpation, but then at the same time, what you guys are not at the mercy of, like we are as instructors, is as soon as I do that, I have complaints, well, we're not learning any adjusting.
Right.
So I have to balance that too. But I totally agree with you. It's like palpation. So, and I think it starts before palpation with observation. So I do a lot of palpation with my eyes. So if I combine observation and then palpation with confirmation, I'm absolutely, like I looked around the room and I picked Ben to do the occiput adjustment today, right? So that's the first step, and then I confirmed it with the palpation. And I think it's a skill that we should spend more time with. But like I said, I'm kind of at the mercy of two masters here. It's like, am I teaching them enough adjusting? They've already had all the palpation by the time they get to try 6.
Okay, so we have another huge problem right now in our profession, and that is we have, and honestly, it's in the circles we're in, which is the evidence-based circles. Basically, we have people telling us that there's no intertester reliability with palpation. So, and I mean, sometimes I don't even know how to defend it. I just like,
I do.
Except for like, just please come to my office for a day and just watch. Like, if I didn't know how to joint play,
Yeah.
I wouldn't know, what to do.
Here's the
basically.
problem, and I have the article, I mean, I have to look it up, but I have the article that shows that any hands-on examination procedure, in the medical field, there's no inter-examiner reliability.
Right.
So they've tested palpation of the thyroid, palpation of the liver, everything that you can touch. And there's no consistent inter-examiner reliability. Does that mean medicine has given up palpation of the liver? They haven't, because it's still a procedure based on anatomy and based on, in our case, biomechanics, that has to precede the actual treatment, right? The medical profession has a bit of a bonus, is they might palpate a liver or a thyroid, whatever, but they often have lab tests that can verify what they're doing. Well, if we ever went that direction, if we had some, say, a motion based radiograph that could prove what we palpated, but even then that would be astronomically expensive and probably have other problems.
Well, and I mean, this is one thing that Dr. Levitt talked about is you have experience built into your hands.
Yeah.
So any piece of technology or like artificial intelligence is not going to be able to capture you doing whatever we're talking about 50,000 times, where you're just like learning and feeling. And I'm 18 years into this, and I mean, I am getting better at such a rate still in my career. Like if I just even look like 2 years ago, I'm like so much better. And I think no one ever talks about like that. As you move along in your career, you're, improving your ability to do all these different things.
One of the things that really helps the motion palpation instructors is actually teaching. because one of the things that I found is when I came here, I knew how to do all the adjustments, but then I had to explain them.
Right.
And then to explain them, you have to break them down into steps. And then when you break them down into steps, you realize that sometimes you skip a step, and when you failed, maybe that's why you failed, because you skipped that step. So as an example, the upper rib adjustment that I was actually taught by Dr. Lustig at Logan. I was teaching a seminar out there. He's in, I want to say, St. Charles, Missouri, out by you.
Yeah, that's close to me.
And he taught me this upper rib adjustment. And for 2 years, I was the best upper rib adjuster on the planet, on the right side. And I couldn't do it on the left to save my life. And I didn't have anybody behind me, looking at me,
right,
trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong. And eventually it molded together somehow that I got it. But it was totally ironic is, when I got here, I realized that when you break each adjustment down into steps, you're actually better for it. Now, as an athlete or an adjuster, you're not using steps.
Right.
Right? You're way beyond that. But I also know that any athlete that's struggling starts back over through the steps.
The other thing, you get a second chance to palpate in the setup of your adjustment.
Exactly.
So that's one thing I learned. Like sometimes you might joint place something, you get set up. If you're not at that edge of that paraphysiological space, or that in range there, then and I think in palpation and in adjusting, that's like another struggle for people. They're not at in range.
Yeah.
So what you need to be a wrecking ball in a millimeter of space at in range. What people do is they set up in mid range, and then they have this really deep force,
And in my opinion, aggressive force.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Every time you don't do something correctly or on the wrong patient, I go back to that, having the right patient. Have a fixation, get it to in range, have the right patient that fits that adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
With very few exceptions, it takes a whole lot less.
Right.
So, and I disqualify that any male above 60 doesn't necessarily fit that. You've got to rock their world, right? But I think a lot of doctors way overdo on the power, because they haven't done exactly what you said, haven't got it to in range. Maybe they're not restricted. And again, I did this once at a seminar in New Mexico. We had 100 people. And I said, guys, by the time you're done palpating, you should be able to tell if you do this adjustment whether you can make it move or not. You should know already. I said, it's like in the guys who drive the pilots on the planes, where they have to land on the what's the big ship?
Aircraft carrier.
The aircraft carriers, they call it calling the ball. So they have this thing that they have to line up with, and they have to know whether they're going to hit or they have to fly off, otherwise they're going to crash. So I did that in a seminar in New Mexico, and I palpated 10 people down the row, and I said, I'm going to move you, and it's not going to work on you. And I literally hit every one, except I was able to move one that I said I wouldn't be able to. But I was able to move all the ones I said I was going to move.
Which brings us to another really good point, being able to do all adjustments.
Yes.
And that's the one thing I challenge myself to is, I tell my students at Logan, you should be able to pick any book off that shelf. And a good adjuster is going to be, I don't care if it's Gonstead, if it's Maitland, whatever it is, you should be able to pull that off. But so then what you get to is, can you marry the palpation to the adjustment to the patient, right?
Yes.
So maybe I'll have you talk a little bit about that, being able to take all the adjustments we know, and then through your own experience be able to pick, seat it's a better way, a thumb moves a better way, etc.
A list like this.
That was dropped from God, wasn't it?
So, and that's what, so I always talk about the fact that we have to have a big toolbox of adjustments, and we have to be able to reach in and pick the right one. And sometimes we just pick one for fun because it's not that important and we know it's going to move.
Mm-hmm.
But for the difficult patients, we have to have the right adjustment that fits them. And if you don't have it, you stretch the adjustment, which means you only stretch an adjustment two ways. You either overpower it, which is probably the most common, or you change the biomechanics of the adjustment, or you distort the biomechanics of the adjustment. So, and I think this happens a lot with the pelvis, where we kick maneuvers are fantastic for medium to stiff people, but they're not for flexible people. So we distort the biomechanics, we tuck the pelvis under, which now compresses the pelvis, and all of that tension goes immediately to the lumbars, and we do some massive kick, and we hear all this noise, and we think it's moving the pelvis when it's just moving something totally different because we changed the dynamics of the actual adjustment. And so, and I see that all the time, and that's why I've broken all the adjustments I know into list, not only in terms of mine, is what adjustment, the name of the adjustment, who it is designed for, and then the difficulty rating, right? So like on the seated occiput that we just did, that's usually for medium to stiff males or females with strong restriction, and the difficulty rating for a student learning that, I give that a 7, right? Upper SI flexion, which we also did, for me that's a 5, right? So, when you understand that as a student, hopefully you understand if it's a 10 or an 8 to 10, and you fail for a while, it's okay. When you're doing a 3 adjustment and you're failing, you need to do some more work.
Right.
But
well, let's talk about some adjusting. So you kind of became world renowned and famous for your occiput adjustment. So what makes you such a great seated occiput adjuster? What are the qualities that you have?
I think it comes back to Dr. Fay and the impulse. I think when I went to the first Fay seminar, Lynn Fay, since we're all listening here, the original, the OG of motion palpation, he taught us how to impulse, and he would I do the cough thing and he did the spit thing, right? So he'd say, when you get set up, don't think about it, don't try to command it, just be in the right position. You will spontaneously and reflexively move if you just spit. And he says, if you're slow, you would drool, right? So I came away from that seminar, and I tell my students, very modestly, of course, that I came away from that seminar in Tri-3 as fast as any chiropractor on the planet. I didn't have their skill, but I have their speed, because reflexes, unless we have a neurological problem, a disease, if you will, all our reflexes are roughly the same speed. So if we can learn to harness the reflex through relaxation and developing that, we're all the same speed. So you never have to worry about, oh my God, you're slow. And that literally is the hardest things I have to teach my students. Because I told them, I said, just be noisy for a while until you don't have to, right?
Well, it's interesting, Terry. I don't know if you're familiar with the paper, but they looked at Division III tennis players, and they were allowed to grunt.
Yeah.
And they improved their the velocity coming off the racket in a forehand and a serve when allowed to grunt. So, which is based, if we're talking DNS, we always talk about intra-abdominal pressure, bracing, etc. But that's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But what's interesting on me, just as a side note, so we had the DAC bars come out to my office, and they had ultrasound on my abdominal wall. Yeah. So actually now I'm not, at this point, I thought I actually was. I thought we'd see that. But actually, for me and now at this point, it's just all intra-abdominal pressure. Although I learned so I think when you're learning,
that's
you
what
have
I'm saying.
to do that. Yeah.
When you're learning. And I think it takes 3 weeks. If you do the toggle board thing, or if you do the impulse thing, and you're learning adjustment for about 3 weeks, if you're noisy, that's all it takes.
Right.
And I think if you fail, get noisy.
Right.
Like, I've never missed adjustment and failed and not been able to grunt and make it move.
Right.
So if I fail, I just bring it back.
So even my son right now, he's big into baseball right now. So we're working on hitting, and with him, like at contact, I'm having him grunt just to like feel what it feels like to. Yeah. So and I mean, I think.
And I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, you've seen me adjust. I don't know if I contract. I don't know.
Well, I think, and this is what we teach at DNS, like what your brain regulates and modulates is you just need the perfect amount of stabilization after you've learned the skill.
Yeah.
Like the body would never choose to use more stabilization.
Yeah.
You're just using the perfect amount. But in the beginning, you suck so bad at it, you have to grunt. And, because I mean, you taught me. I mean, I was cough thrusting on everything, you know.
You ever watch Corey do his impulse thing?
Yeah, it's a riot.
You should record that.
Oh, he was one of our first podcasts. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I'd love to see that.
Corey's just an amazing adjuster. So okay, so let's move to the body drop. So what I got a couple things I can add in on body drop, teaching body drop myself, but what makes for the best body droppers in the world?
Shot putters.
So what's hard is force equals mass times acceleration.
I can tell you what makes the worst.
That'll help.
First, the worst body droppers ever. Yoga or any super posture person, because they can't
round.
Any athlete that is used to preloading that front leg is usually a good dropper, you know. And what I do is I start them at the bottom, right? So I have them lie on the patient totally relaxed, and then I have, in the beginning, in the learning phase, and then I have them come up and fall. And I don't know if you saw the Facebook thing the other day. One of the students from New York posted a picture of a table that I broke.
Yeah, I did see that actually.
And it's like all we were doing was doing that.
The drill.
It's so powerful. It's like you literally just lie on them, and you elevate yourself from your legs and your hip, and then you fall. And once you get that, you just freeze that, and you make a contact, and you fall and impulse at the bottom.
But if we look at Newton's second law, which is force equals mass times acceleration, we have mass. So I'm going to just fall on things. So, but if you're Sarah Maki, who's literally one of the best adjusters in the history of our profession, she's tiny, but her body drop creates so much power. So if you don't have the mass part of that equation, you have to be world class in your ability to accelerate.
Yes. And there's a cheating step that I don't teach everybody, which is once you still have to have the same basics. So it doesn't matter if you're 100 pounds or 300, the basics are the same. If you're 100 pounds, you have to cheat toward more. If you're 300 pounds, you got to back off a bit. Mm-hmm. But I think all of them start the same, is you shut the switch off and you are free falling. The difference, and I think if we videoed Sarah, you might see this, is I never add velocity from my trunk. In other words, flexing my trunk.
It's not like hip hinging. It's a full body.
It's all just falling.
Right.
But if I have a smaller dog that I'm teaching, they still have to have the basics of falling and shutting that off. But then they have to learn how to accelerate the torso down, and they have to have perfect timing of the force going from the physical part of the vertical drop to the impulse that drives that force through the joint horizontally.
Well, I mean, that's a big mistake where people they'll do the dropping drill and you're like, wow, that just looks great. But then the patient or them are like, yeah, but it's not coming through my contact.
Exactly.
So And what I learned that was they need to have a well dorsiflex wrist, and it needs to be underneath them. If you're as an instructor, if we're watching them set up and they're not doing that, none of that great energy that you're producing is going to go through your content.
It's a lot of energy that just bounces off the patient.
Exactly.
Gets
So
spread out.
yeah. So I mean, once that was an epiphany teaching moment for me in the body drop was, I mean, I can just look at somebody, and if I can see them get into that position there, I mean, at that point, it's a hammer and a nail,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So anyways, but maybe what are your criteria for patients that make good kick patients versus a drop? Because remember back in the day, it was like either you were a good dropper or you're a good kicker. I always tell the story. It's like when you get married and you pick the side of the bed you're going to sleep on, and it never changed, or the place at your table.
I used to say at seminars, I don't say it anymore, but I used to say I teach kicks so sissies can adjust too. But the point is, well, kicks are fun, first off. They're a good change of pace, but they're meant for medium to stiff individuals. So I can teach a Tri-3 student how to move my pelvis their very first time with a kick in 3 minutes, because I am primed for that adjustment. What they're not for are for flexible people.
Right.
And there's actually 3 style of kicks, and the worst is the standard kick pull. It's the absolute worst for flexible people. But we graduate up to a kick push, which is a little better, especially if you're taller like yourselves. And we have another one which we call Manel's kick, based on John Manel's forearm move, which actually, as a kick, works really well, even for a lot of flexible people.
I think too with kicking, like when I need global movement, like, you know, if I see a 70-year-old stenotic patient, I'm not just looking for that isolated L5 S1. Like, I'm wanting to just rip open the whole lumbar spine. And when you need to do that, I think a kick allows you to just get more global movement. Sometimes you want to do that. And then the drop is more for precision.
Yeah,
you know?
and the drop is, what I call the drop is the crescent wrench in your toolbox. You can use it on small people, but you got to back off. You can use it on 400-pounders. I know when Sarah's doing a big person, she's not kicking.
Right.
She's dropping, right? So I you know, and the drop is just non-thinking. You walk up, you've done your palpation. It's destructive. I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and there's no I mean, I had a horrific water skiing accident where I literally destroyed my shoulder. So after surgery, I mean, I was able to body drop in 3 weeks, even on my surgical arm, just because I'd taken the time. I can, and that's like a mistake we see literally at most of the schools, where the students, like, they end up hurting themselves because they're trying to shove and push. And the second you feel that, I mean, there should basically be no tension in your arm, in your upper extremity.
When I first came here in '93, and they had an 8th try class just getting ready to go into the clinic, and they all asked me. So I held a lot of open labs at the time. They all wanted to see what I had and stuff, and so they all said, "Doc, you got to show us something that we're all killing our shoulders." I mean, literally, I had tons of students saying that, and it was all because of the old style. Shoulder out there, elbow out there, and that was, I mean, I don't know how chiropractors survive. I really don't. I mean, and to be honest, you do meet some older chiropractors that are really beat up, because if you don't have good personal biomechanics, then you're going to get wrecked, like not having the patient underneath you. You're going to wreck your wrist or your shoulder or whatever.
When you have more mass, you can get away with being a good dropper, etc. Now, the extremities are the ultimate equalizer. Like, so that's where if somebody is benefiting from having more mass, now that's about to all go away, because you got to be able to really be quick, and you got to know anatomy really well. That's the thing I've learned, like, from teaching extremities, is people just don't know how joints move. Therefore, they, because you don't have that knowledge, you don't joint play well, and of course you don't adjust well. But what makes for great extremity adjusters?
Speed. I started something new last try, as I'm holding an open lab that starts in Try 2. So I volunteered to, because, somebody needed to do it, is our palpation class in Try 1. And so I have them start thrusting in Try 1. And then in Try 2, I hold the open lab for them. And one of the week 3, which is our first week, we actually start with second cuneiform midfoot dorsiflexion.
Which is the most common joint blockage in the foot. Everybody talks about
Exactly.
talocrural or subtalar, but that midfoot
Oh,
blockage,
yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
most common.
And so I start them that in Try 2, and I also look at one of the things that I think is important is transferable skills and force generators. So if we really took all the force generators we have, there's very few. There's maybe 10. And yet we apply those force generators to different, like a kick is a kick, right? A kick pull is a kick pull, that's one. Kick push is another, right? A midfoot dorsiflexion adjustment is one of our distractive type adjustments that we can use on the subtalar joint, we can use on the ankle mortise, we can use on the midfoot, we can use on the hip. And so I try to, in this open lab, I try to develop those transferable skills. Week 5 is occiput. And they don't get that until Try 4, 6 actually, because Dr. Ed does, it's seated occiput, by the way. And I personally think, number one requirement if I'm going to refer a patient to you is seated occiput. Number 2 is if you could do this first page, then I have every confidence in you that you could do anything in the world.
Right. So what's interesting too, and I don't know what the number is exactly, but I always say 50. There's 50 people in the world who are good at extremity adjusting, literally, like that are like above everybody else. And so I think the thing that, again, we're back to like, you have to sometimes take a step back and like understand how anatomy works. And like, you can't be an expert in the TMJ if you don't understand how the joint works, you know? And I think like people take like a big hack or a shortcut and they don't take the time to understand like pertinent functional anatomy, but then also how to joint play with that knowledge, and then like how to be a good adjuster. And I mean, that's like the missing link. And with adjusting too, I mean, that if you're a good adjuster, you create space for yourself. It could be with a team, a college, you know, whoever you're working with. I always tell a story like, I mean, as much as I know about DNS, if I'm like in a training room, professional training room, nobody wants to, they're not like, Brett, can you teach me this DNS move?
Yeah.
They say, Brett, can you teach me how to, you know, manipulate well? So, I mean, it's like the one thing I think that will create space for you in whatever environment you potentially are in. Yeah. However, people don't take the time to, you know.
Yeah, well, and, you know, at least at the national MoPal group, every single one of them that has worked hard, that's graduated, has went on and is killing it in practice. You know, we've got, I mean, you obviously know Rich.
Yeah.
Rich was the Motion Palpation president. He's got a fantastic practice. He's teaching for MoPal. He's just doing great things. Jimmy was his vice president. Nugent.
Yeah. Love Jimmy.
Doing great. Everybody that has come through, and it's not just our presidents, it's people that have worked very hard. I guarantee you there are guys that are not even motion palpation reps or anything else that I would refer to in a minute.
Yeah, of course.
I see them in here working all the time. You know, everybody wants, you know, and you probably had this when you were in student clinic or regular clinic. With student clinic, everybody knows you and wants to go to you. I mean, that happened to you too?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, the MPI docs are always the ones that are like sought after in like the student clinic systems.
Every time, yeah.
What about, Terry, maybe this would be a good segue of, so I mean, we've kind of talked, you've been here a long time, you've taught a numerous amount of students. Talk about your lineage, like How about someone that's taken a class with you or your students or national? Like, what would they say that would make you proud of like how you've created doctors and what are the things that you like to hear from someone that's taken a class from you?
I get this sometime, or they'll just say, they are so far ahead of some of the doctors in the field. I mean, they are literally, because a lot of times they'll say you need a niche. Well, being fantastic itself is a niche, and I know you've experienced this. You give people adjustment, they've never had anything like it.
Yeah.
And you can't get rid of that patient.
Right.
It's literally a practice management tool to give awesome adjustments.
Len, we were just with Len recently on our podcast, and I mean, he's just doing great, and he's amazing. But so we were saying, Len used to tell me, he goes, Brett, if you can give them the best adjustment they've ever had, they're going to be on board for all the other stuff that you would potentially be doing. And it was interesting too with Len. I mean, he's 82, and we watched him adjust patients. He adjusted us. I mean, he is still just as excited at 82 than he probably was when he was 32. And the other thing for him is he's kind of like taking a victory lap now, because he gets to see what he created.
Oh, look at what he created.
And then, MPI right now is literally just exploding. I mean, and it's because now, when we say DNS or we say MDT, MPI is now being thrusted in those conversations. And what, for me, I'll speak for myself, is when somebody from MDT or DNS, they're like, what is MPI? And then you get to tell the story of how this all started. So
yeah, and I've also had, I taught in New York about a month ago, and this one girl had been in practice a year in a multidisciplinary practice, and she had not adjusted a soul because she had zero confidence in adjusting. And that Monday morning, I got 5 texts from her, and I got a text, a screenshot from a patient that sent her a text of how happy she was that she actually adjusted her. And it was just, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
That is awesome.
What do you think? What's the future of the chiropractic profession? Let's go all philosophical now.
Well, when Lynn Fay started this with the paradigm shift, which was a big thing back then, I was all spit and vinegar, and I was trying to convince everybody.
You run out of energy, don't you? I mean, it's fatiguing.
And then I would teach people, and they would be like that, and they would have all this energy. And then they just got tired of fighting idiots. And that's the hard problem, is, you want to have all this energy, and yet you see perfectly rational people jump off the deep end and do this crazy, stupid crap. When does it stop?
Right.
I'm up for suggestions. How do we change that?
Right.
How do we change? Right now we have 3 or 4 of my past students, who weren't very good students, to be honest, out there putting on Facebook their Y-axis strap adjustment, watching their patient cry as they slid halfway down the table and grunt and probably pee their pants and think that's good. When does that stop?
Right.
I think, and again, I think the problem our profession has is a cavitation addiction. Because cavitation, in their mind, proves everything. Proves they're right, proves it's effective, and no understanding of biomechanics or basic anatomy. I've been teaching for years that is way too dangerous, and Greg Kramer, I don't know if you know Greg Kramer.
Yep.
Greg is a anatomist who's also a chiropractor, and he said that in order to deliver enough force to get to the lumbar spine, and move the lumbar spine from the cervicals, you're driving all that force through the cervicals, which do not have enough ligamentous strength to handle that much force. And I've always said there's a reason why they never say, I'm going to hang you by your waist until you're dead. It won't work. But if you hang you by your neck, it kills you, right? And so my fear is ring dinger and y-axis strap fans out there are one patient away from a load of bad press, which will not affect them at all and will be bad for our entire profession.
The term I use is liberate yourself from the cavitation. Like, because as a student, like once you get that clear, like life becomes a lot easier because you're just basically, you're imparting motion into a stiff segment. But the exact example I tell them, it's like you go home as a student, you treat your family. If today's Wednesday, then you see him again on Friday, and you do the exact same thing again, and it doesn't cavitate, and they look up at you and they're like, what, you forgot how to do this in 48 hours? Yeah. The huge irony is that patient is actually probably better and you've restored, but this is how powerful the cavitation is. Like, to the patient, they think like something needs to go and you didn't get it, you know?
Which is why you should be a great palpator.
Yeah, and you can
and only adjust what needs to be adjusted, and you will cavitate.
You will cavitate.
And you will be always successful.
Right.
And like I said, one of the things that when I'm demoing at a seminar, one of the things I'm best at is picking the right person.
Subtle brag.
No, picking the right person, right? So I can look in a room and say, that's going to work on them, and I'll bring them up, right? Versus just having, say, some grade 8 flexibility criteria girl for doing a seated occiput, you know, and you got to knock her into the middle of next week. And it looks so violent. It's like, so if you pick somebody that is the right person for that, it's going to work.
Well, and Lynn, when we were with him, I mean, got reinvigorated watching Lynn assess. He was looking at Taylor, where he basically, you know, just unplugged from the cavitation, just pure like what he's feeling in the joint. He already cavitated, and he's bringing Taylor back. That example was he put him side posture and did a lateral flexion move in his thoracic spine, but being so unplugged from the cavitation and just like feeling this plane of motion is still restricted, going back to another adjustment and not being so married to the cavitation. So,
and you know, it's like, should our patients be crying when you adjust it? I mean, I watch it. So the worst crime is they put it on YouTube or
I know.
whatever, and it's like, this is supposed to help our profession. I watched a guy. He had a lady who had previously 17 or so compression fractures and healed. She was obviously older lady and just crunching the living crap out of her. She's groaning and crying the whole time. Then just does 4 or 5 adjustments on her cervical spine, but he wasn't done. And he strapped her up and did a y-axis strap adjustment. And, you know, just it's so ironic because people say they feel euphoric. Well, I could do the same for you. I would just take a big knife and jab you with it and pull the knife out. That's neurologically the euphoria you're feeling when that happens, is you have such a high pain level that when you take it away, it feels good, but it's not necessarily good for you.
Well, I'm so different than a lot of people in that, like, I really respect somebody who really understands force generation. Like, I don't want to feel like I'm in a car accident when you thrust on me. Like, I want the perfect amount of force, because the other thing too is a patient, if you can't relax your body, it's not going to go well. You know, that's what I tell my students. Like, if you feel tension at all in your patient, just step away from it. Like, because it's not going to go well.
Sometimes you give them tension.
Yeah, right.
You give them tension because you're too tense or you're fiddling around with stuff.
But I think marrying the force to what's in front of you is never talked about because it's a hard skill to have. But I feel like the best adjusters in the world, they have really good, like, tact, if you will, to know exactly how much force for the situation.
That's something that I've learned, is I had all the power in the beginning. I could blow through everything. But to know now that I want to use the least amount of power, that's the skill.
Well, you used to say it's like a haircut.
Yeah.
You know, once you've gone too far, you can't go back.
Yeah.
But you can always add more force.
You can always add more, but you can't ever take an adjustment back.
Right.
Once given. Right?
George DeFranca, he was on our. We went up, saw him, and he's really good on like he'll do like sometimes like just a pre-thrust just to kind of see. And I think that's a really cool
That's
idea.
a good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. I love it. What a great conversation, guys. Holy smokes.
Well, this is fun.
Yeah. Well, Terry, I mean, I just thank you for, your lineage is so impressive. I mean, you've got some amazing people that you've taught, and I think that the profession is better off for having you in those situations. And so I know I thank you for setting me up with some of my teachers. You know, I'll never forget Corey Campbell telling some great Terry Elder stories.
They were not true.
Well, I know. I mean, being on the board at MPI with Mark and Corey, I mean, we're so proud of like our instructors and Terry. I mean, you just continue to, just be the best in the world at what you're doing. I got to thank you personally because I wouldn't be here without you. So I mean, that's the other big thank you. So
Brett, fangirling a little bit, and once this comes out, guys, we have some amazing adjusting videos of Terry actually going through a couple things, and so be sure to check those out. And next time Terry rolls around your city, make sure to check him out. He's one of the best. So awesome.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Terry. Great to see you, man. Thank
Thank you.
All right, have a good day, guys.
Perfectly timed.